Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tomiwa Ellery, and today I'll be moderating the session, Barriers and Opportunities for Internet Access in Africa during the COVID-19 pandemic. Tomiwa Ellery, and I work with the Center for Human Rights at University of Pretoria, and I'm hosting the session on behalf of Small Media. And so, 1 second, please. I might have to. Okay, so today we have our esteemed panelists joining us. I would allow them introduce themselves, and to start with, I'll call on Tapiwa to kindly please introduce himself. And yeah, thank you, Tapiwa. Over to you. Hi, Tapiwa. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, great. Sure. Kindly introduce yourself.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much, Tomio. My name is Tapiwa Chinembiro. I'm currently working as a policy researcher with Research ICT Africa, and I specialize mainly on digital policy and mobile pricing in Africa, as well as COVID-19 post-COVID-19 economic recovery. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that brief introduction. And over to you, Juliet. Just a brief introduction.
Great. My name is Julian Nanfuka. I'm based out of Kampala, Uganda, where I work with the Collaboration on International ICT Policy for East and Southern Africa. That is CIPESA. We are a think tank that looks at the various facets of digital access, use, and perception across the continent. Glad to be here with you all.
Thank you, Juliet. Robert, would you be able to introduce yourself, or do you mind? Would you like me to introduce you?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon from Uganda. My name is Robert Nkwangu, and I'm deaf. I'm using sign language with my interpreter here. I'm a disability inclusion specialist, and I'm working as the executive director of the Uganda National Association of the Deaf. I'm happy to be part of this discussion. So I can address the barriers with the accessibility of internet or internet usage to vulnerable persons in Uganda. Thank you very much. And of course, my interpreter is called Bukenya Wycliffe. Thank you very much. That's the voice you're hearing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you. And last but not the least, Asen, just a quick introduction.
Hello, this is Asen Tungali, calling in from Goma in the eastern side of the DRC. So I'm with Root International, Executive Director of Root International, and we are focusing our projects currently looking at the intersection of technology and human rights. So I'm really happy and pleased to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asen. And without wasting much time, so today the focus of the conversation, like I said earlier, is to identify barriers and opportunities for internet access in Africa, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. And you know, I don't think we can use an hour to exhaust the objective of this session. This is because Africa is wide in scope and meaning for us to engage on the issue for just an hour, especially for example in terms of barriers that face internet access in the region, and also in engaging the kind of opportunities that are available currently, especially given the peculiar challenges we face as a result of the ongoing pandemic. But without taking too much time from our speakers, our first speaker today would be, for the session, will be Tapiwa Chinembiri, who will be speaking to us to give us an overview of internet access and some of the various barriers he, for example, has identified with respect to internet access in the region in the course of his work. Over to you now, Tapiwa. Thank you.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Sure.
I also think others can't.
You can't see my screen?
I can. I'm sure others can too.
Okay, great. So
Oh,
Yes,
yes,
I can
please,
see
I
it.
can see. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. So I would just need to give a brief overview of the internet access at various barriers actually to access in the region. So the few areas that I've sort of like identified include digital taxes actually that we have seen pre and then during the COVID-19 pandemic in quite a lot of different countries in Africa, as well as like there are countries actually that have imposed the over-the-top social media taxes as well, in countries like Uganda, Cameroon, Zambia, Tanzania. Like the bloggers tax that have been imposed in Tanzania, and then the social media use in Uganda and Zambia. And then Cameroon had also implemented one before the COVID-19. However, there were contradictions actually when countries then started to implement policies that enacted to curtail the COVID-19 pandemic. So the second problem was that of internet shutdowns that we've seen in Cameroon, Chad, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, as well as now recently in Sudan. And then we had the infrastructure gap, which I would like to talk about the critical mass, 20% internet penetration rate as the favorable condition for a country to realize economic dividends. Then the digital gender divide is about men versus women in terms of internet access rates. You know, as we know that women, the youth, and the rural dwellers are the marginalized in terms of access to digital resources. So I have got a visual here, which I took, I constructed based on our after access survey data, which we conducted in 2017, between 2017 and 2018 here at Research ICT Africa. So we're talking about, in this case, I just picked three main components, which I would like to dwell on, which is the internet access, the gender gap, as well as the urban rural in selected African countries, which we did. So these are nationally representative surveys, which the ones in red, in this case, they actually show the penetration rate in each country. And you can see that in South Africa, only in South Africa where we had above half of its population having access to the internet, and then followed by Nigeria, and then Ghana and Kenya had the same as 26%, 26 in 100 people having access to the internet. But we didn't have much in Mozambique and Rwanda having the least internet penetration rates. The second component is that of the gender gap, which is the gap between the men and the women's access to the internet. And you could see that this is actually higher in Rwanda and Mozambique, as well as in Nigeria. But in South Africa, we only had about 12% gap between the men and the women, which was the slim one according to many countries which we have here. And then the urban rural gap, we can see that it's better in South Africa and Kenya, right? And then because we see that there's a lot of issues that happen in Kenya in terms of mobile money use and how that is integrated to financial inclusion. So there is a lot of internet usage there, which entirely most of the population is actually using. But we can see that in Mozambique, we had quite high gap between those in the urban and those in the rural in terms of infrastructural developments. So there was a paper by Roller and Weverman, which was talking about what rate which a country should actually have for it to be able to realize the economic dividends in terms of at least 20% of the internet penetration rate. So this was telecommunication and infrastructure investments that enabled them to realize the aggregate economic growth in a country. So what we would like to see going forward, even during the COVID-19 pandemic, is that we would like to see countries improving in terms of internet access, so that if we have at least 20% of the internet penetration rate, then we can use internet to grow the economy at aggregate level. And this is what we see from the After Access survey. Then we have one of our main projects, which is called the Retail African Mobile Pricing Index, also called the RAMP Index. And what we do in this is that we track the prices for every mobile network operator in every country in Africa. So we collect these prices on a quarterly basis, and then we report them on the prevailing exchange rate when we then compare these prices across each country. So what we do is that we use the prevailing exchange rate, and then we convert the prices to USD prices, and then we do the comparison. And we can actually see that in 2019, for instance, in South Africa, there was a competition inquiry, competition commission, which happened in 2019, and then they produced a report. And this was actually urging MTN and Vodacom, which are the main operators in South Africa, to reduce their prices. So what they did was that the price reduction actually took place during the COVID-19 lockdown. So it was not as a result of the COVID-19 lockdown itself in March 2020, but it was as a result of a 2-year-long inquiry, which was actually being pushed by the Competition Commission. And their findings, they actually use some of the findings that we get from the RAMP index to actually reduce the prices. Now, in South Africa, actually, in terms of the data costs, now we can actually see that one of the main challenges that we have in Africa is that data is actually very expensive. And in USD terms, we can actually see that South Africa is actually ranking 35 out of the 47 countries that we have in the RAMP index for the 1 GB monthly basket. And MTN, this year, they have then reduce the prices again for 1 GB basket up to 85 Rand, which then becomes the cheapest for 1 GB in South Africa. But comparing to other countries, you can actually see that South Africa is still performing badly relative to other countries. So I will show you in a moment a graph which shows this. But then in Sudan, MTN charges the cheapest prices for mobile 1 GB data, which you can only find in that country. But unfortunately, because of the ongoing political issues, not many people are actually able to utilize the cheaper data that we have. So now you can actually see from this graph, I gave top 3 countries that have got top 5 countries that have got the cheapest data in Sudan, Tanzania, Tunisia, and Ethiopia. So these are prices from the cheapest operator and the cheapest product that is being offered in that country. So we will then assume that a rational consumer will purchase the cheapest data product which is available in the market. But as I said earlier on, we have got these bottom performers in which South Africa is actually ranking 35, and then we have got Seychelles and Chad having around $18 per GB, and that is actually very very expensive. So we did a paper during the lockdown in last year, actually saying that even in as much as MTN and Vodacom have reduced the prices in South Africa, if we compare those prices to other African countries, data still remains relatively high. We have a new project which is called the COVID-19 Responses for Equity, which we undertake this year, and this is the latest data that we have, which speaks to how people managed to use digital tools during the COVID-19 pandemic. And what we see was that most of the services people resorted to access services and goods online, actually. And according to our After Access survey report, there was this issue of lack of smartphones as one of the main barriers of getting online. But what we see here is that in South Africa as well as in Nigeria, so we conducted this phone survey using the random digit dialing method, and we did that in two countries. And we can see in red the gender gap, in this case between women and men in both South Africa and Nigeria, which is about 7 percentage point difference in all the countries, which also confirms what we see earlier on from the after access survey on the new data that we have. And this is the data which we are currently analyzing. So we have got these higher level findings, which can also confirm that more men are having access to the internet compared to women. And that's something that we need to push forward in terms of what we need to do in Africa. Then in terms of the opportunities, I think we have seen that there have been datafication and digitalization, which has actually taken place during lockdown, and people have managed to actually do schoolwork online. And then people have been managed to working online also from home, like as well as remote lessons. And what we see across the data is that mobile phones are the most popular device that people are using to both work from home and learn online for university students, as well as other countries that have utilized these methods. So we can actually see then as well that we have the devices that are being used. We can actually see that we need more smartphones, because we can see that the proportions that we see of people who were doing that online is mainly they were using mobile phones. In this case, obviously, these were smartphones. Yeah. And then we see the same in Nigeria in terms of device usage. And this is actually very important as well to say, okay, when we want to utilize or when we want to make use of the opportunities, we can see that most countries have resorted through their ministries of health to actually post information about COVID-19 related awareness online using the digital tools. And most people have to go online to actually see what they can do. And this can stem from the devices which people actually have to use, because primarily people use the mobile phones to actually access the internet. So this is just a brief description of what we see, and I will leave it to others who then need to talk about affordability as well, so that we can have a discussion going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tapia, for that presentation. That was representative data to help buttress the point that has been made in respect to barriers currently posed to internet access in the region. The next speaker would be Juliet. Juliet will be speaking to us. Will be examining the contextual impacts of some of these barriers, for example, that Tapia has identified, and if she chooses, will give both Ugandan and African experiences with respect to internet access and some of those barriers that Tapia had referred to earlier on. Thank you.
Thank you, Tapia and Tomiwa. Tapia was pretty much shed quite a bit of light on many topics that I wanted to talk about. But nonetheless, I think if we were to push it further into the affordability aspect, it is one, like has already been mentioned, is affecting a greater proportion of the continent. I think you might have noticed from the slides that Tapia shared that the top countries with more affordable internet have a closer proximity to the undersea cables, which means that landlocked countries are still battling with particularly high costs. Not all of them, that case may not apply to all of them, but that sure is the case for a country like Uganda, for example. We still have not reached the point of where we can get 1 gig of data for no more than 2% of our average income. We are very far away from that. And we're pushed even further with the introduction of the social media tax, for example. But in addition to that, even though the social media tax was removed, it was replaced by an overall taxation to access the internet, which still places an affordability barrier for many citizens. But despite that, under the circumstances, considering that COVID has forced millions to go online, people have desperately tried to navigate their way back online, to navigate online spaces and to find ways to stay online. It is not everybody who has succeeded in that. And as such, we have created yet another layer or level to the digital divide, even within the country. But this is not a case that's playing out particularly in Uganda. It's playing out in various other countries in various forms. Remember, in South Africa, even those students, for example, were given data to enable them to remain studying online. Some saw it as an opportunity to make money because they were selling data to their community members who did not have as easy access as they did because they were not in school, yet they wanted to remain online, yet they wanted to conduct their businesses online. So COVID has introduced a very interesting dynamic or perspective to the digital divide within communities before we even look at it from a global south, global north, west, whatever, developed, underdeveloped country perspective. And these are some of the subtleties that we need to be much more aware of. Of course, added to that is the gender dynamic. There's a report released by the Alliance for Affordable Internet, which noted that over the last 10 years, it has cost governments in the area of $1 trillion in lost income because of the exclusion of women in low middle income countries. Again, affordability issues. Women are often left out due to issues around affordability, due to issues around perceptions and use of the internet. We have seen instances where even where women may be online, for example, they are more likely to face online persecution, trolling, revenge, pornography, use of the images without consent. And these dynamics are forcing some women offline, even though there is a lower percentage of them online. In developing countries, men are 52% more likely to be online than female counterparts. And this is because they have easier access to finances, easier access to education, easier access to devices. Their dynamics of access are very different to those of women, including on issues of affordability. In some instances, men are more likely to get jobs than women. So that plays out into how access is and affordability is then defined, including during COVID times. Even though we saw the transference of businesses online, we have seen a rise in women doing online businesses, but barely enough in comparison to the male counterparts. Another issue that we've also seen is because of the lack of digital savvy, because of not being as active online, women have fallen victim and have been more likely to fall victim to cybercrime than their male counterparts. Again, some of the subtleties, the underbelly of the whole debate around access and affordability, including during COVID times. Another issue I wanted to talk about was the issue of content creation and consumption. And that is very closely linked to the whole debate around, excuse me, access and affordability. If we look at it as a continent, we are still consuming content that is coming from across the ocean because there's barely enough of the continent online. And in part due, of course, to the absence of languages that are readily recognized by the technology of the internet. But we're seeing a dynamic there in representation online. Who is narrating the African story? Who is narrating the story of the African woman in online spaces? Who is pushing back against misinformation? Who is correcting misrepresentation online? And so the longer we remain offline due to issues of affordability and access, we again create the opportunity for the perpetuation of stereotypes and misrepresentation, as has been the case historically. And this is at a time when we should be able to be correcting some of these narratives. Unfortunately, some of this is driven by us in our own states due to unfavorable policies that we create under the guise of protecting state interests, for example. But while we do that, we do more damage to the potential that internet access has for us as a continent and as a people, and as women in particular, but also as youth. The criminalization of using the internet does not do us justice. It instead creates a detrimental perception to being online. I'll again give the case of Uganda, where we saw that social media was seen as a space for narrating gossip and not much more. And for a while, that is what people perceived it as. Of course, the older generation, that is just a space for narrating gossip or spreading gossip, which is highly incorrect. It is a place for business opportunity, education. It is much more than what it was simplified down to in the presidential directive. In Egypt, we have seen a law come out which is treating people with 5,000 followers or more as a media house, thus opening them to arrest for content shared on their platform. Again, creating a negative perception about online use, being online and having a space for people to engage. In Tanzania, the online content regulations saw a need for users to pay almost $1,000 to have an online presence. So what these are doing is really pushing people further away from being present online. Even in those few instances where they can afford, we are instead doing the opposite. But at the same time, as states, we are saying we want to work towards digital transformation. Some going ahead and saying we are working towards digital transformation, despite the presence of rather contradictory laws and measures, excuse me, being introduced by them. And this is at a time when we are talking about having a digital single market, for example, which enables, the easier flow of trade and information and the likes, and still not creating an environment that encourages that level of interaction, with its starting point being creating and ensuring that affordability is made more possible, and ensuring that access, basic infrastructure, for example, basic affordability, the reduction of taxes, for example, on devices, are actually part of the overall plan towards being a member of some of these more global discussions that we are willingly wanting to participate in. So there's a lot to talk about, as Tomiwa pointed out. This having an hour is barely enough to touch on all of the issues. Each of us could easily talk for an hour. But yes, I just wanted to point out another thing that Tomiwa mentioned was that Africa faces peculiar challenges, but I also wanted to point out that we have the opportunity to address these peculiar challenges with peculiar responses. The opportunities unique to the continent are just that, they're unique to the continent and need to be exploited a whole lot more than we currently have. And we need to be thinking in terms of how do we maximize the current circumstance? How do we work towards enabling affordability? I'm particularly keen on this, on the case of Ethiopia, which is, going through its political crisis, and at the same time has opened up the market to of almost 100 million people with the introduction of a second service provider, second telecommunication service provider, because all along they only had one service provider, which was state-owned. So how should they navigate that space of shifting away from being state-controlled to one that is now a more liberal market? And that's considering that some of our countries have so many service providers. We have Orange, Orange, MTN, Airtel, this whole diversity of players, and still not have affordable internet access. So keeping abreast of what is happening, even at country level. In my case, my particular interest would be Ethiopia, would give us some hints on what to do better moving forward. And I think it's something that we all need to be thinking about going forward, while also being aware of the challenges. We need to look out for the opportunities and see where they lie and how we can best exploit them. Without going on to what others may be talking about, I will give it a pause at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliet, for that brilliant presentation. And we'd like to go to the next presenter, Mr. Robert Nkwangu, who will discuss with us internet affordability for vulnerable persons across the region. Over to you, Mr. Robert. Thank you so much.
Oh, we can't hear Robert.
Yes. Mr. Galanga, can you kindly prompt Mr. Robert?
Hello. Sorry, I had muted my phone. Apologies. I muted my device. Apologies.
Okay.
I hope now I'm heard very well, right? Yes.
Yes.
Once again, thank you very much. This is a very, very noble topic. And of course, with the usage of internet, I personally needed to focus on the vulnerable groups of people, especially the people with the disabilities. Surely the pandemic has really revealed a lot of challenges, a lot of barriers in regards to the accessibility of internet and of course, digital technology in response to ICT. There was one study that was done in Uganda, and it covered over 30 people with disabilities. It revealed the different barriers and experiences in accessing the internet. One of them was 86% of these people, they used the desktops to access this internet, which means that they have no smartphones. And the same research also showed that only 17% had these smartphones, and then the other biggest percentage, 83%, used the local phones, the button phones, which are not accessing internet. So these are some of the barriers which people like me who are vulnerable using. So even the accessibility of this software is quite expensive for people with disabilities to access. So if you add the cost of the internet, which my sister Judith was talking about, this is quite very, very expensive for vulnerable people, especially those with disabilities, and this makes it hard for them to access internet. From the information that's been put on the table, the majority of the people right now get information through social media. We look at people who are deaf, for example, use sign language for communication, which means we communicate with other people through video calls, which video calls are only possible maybe using WhatsApp or maybe Facebook messages and all that. Now for Facebook, we are under shutdown in the country, which is very expensive because sometimes, of course, it is locked, and then only the few can access that kind of communication because it is blocked in the country. But also you should remember that a few who have the knowledge and the skills on how to use the internet, because many people with disabilities either live in the rural areas, some of us have not gone to school, 85% have never attained any form of education. So we look at previously the pandemic brought by the COVID, because many things were done online. Previously in the country, we had teaching online, but then all this content that was taught wasn't accessible by our learners with the disability. Because if I interest you of our children who are blind, who are at home, they couldn't access this education. The deaf themselves having these lectures on TV. We look at the internet cafes where people go for these internet services. When in a wheelchair cannot access these places. I have some friends in the universities who usually go to the nearby cafes, but then the materials, these centers for these cafes are in buildings which are not accessible. So the last 2 years, if learning has been online from both primary up to the university level, which means majority of our learners with the disabilities have not benefited. And similarly, the attitude from the community, it's a very big challenge, because from the family members, they feel that people with disabilities are not worth using the internet. They're not worth using it because it's not to their benefit. So of course, it should do with the attitude. So they cannot do anything concerning providing gadgets for us to use. I think it's high time we really had a focus on developing policies which are really inclusive in nature, especially for ICT, embedding issues concerning persons with disabilities, and also the accessibility issues. Whereby, of course, the web access, the guidelines needs to be developed on how to make sure that these webs are really accessible, having different formats that can be accessible, different categories for persons with disabilities, be it blind, be it physical, be it deaf, be it those with autism, mental disability. A detailed, comprehensive, universal design that can be used, and also these guidelines to really implement this, and we can see how we can address these challenges. But also not forgetting the hardware of these gadgets, quite important to be subsidized. Because many people the poverty, there's a very big linkage between poverty and disability. So most of these smartphones are quite dear, quite expensive. We have some subsidized gadgets. This can be very helpful. And finally, the sensitization or training of people with disabilities themselves know how to use internet and how they can get information from internet and how they can access it. These can be very, very helpful and contribute towards the development of the usage of internet by persons with disabilities. And also the government must find a way of waiving taxes from people with disability, because we normally depend, especially with our communication, depends on internet usage, be it data, be it the gadgets that we use, and that can really be very helpful and that can be also inclusive in nature, yes, for people with the disabilities. Moderate time is very short, but just like the previous speaker said, this cannot be exhausted in just an hour. And that can be an eye opener to give the need for the many people with disability, not only in Uganda, but the entire globe, especially Africa as a region. We need all these guidelines in different countries to help in the internet usage for people with disabilities. Thank you very much, moderator.
Thank you so much, Robert, for that super contextual application of the conversation we're having today. And quickly also, because of our time, we'll go to Mr. Asen Tungali. Mr. Asen Tungali will speak to us on how to use inclusion and representation and removing barriers to internet access, and will most likely focus on any country of his choice in the African context. Over to you, Mr. Asen.
Thank you very much, Tomiwa, and thank you, Tapua, thank you, Juliet, and thank you, Robert, for sharing your perspectives on this topic. So this is Arsene Tungali, and I'm calling in from DRC. And I'll be, of course, speaking about barriers in terms of accessing the internet in the context of the DRC. But before going probably into giving my what I have for you today, I think I would give you a bit of context about the DRC. So in the DRC, we have 4 telecom operators who have been operating for a couple of years now, and only 3 of them are nationwide. And we have 1 which is still in some specific areas, but not covering the whole country. So we are, like, as of Q2 of 2021 of this year, according to the regulatory agency reports, we are having like nearly 45 million of subscribers to those 4 mobile telephone operators. And we, in terms of mobile phone penetration in the country, we are at nearly 51%. So only around 51% of the Congolese population are having access to the internet through their mobile phones. And so the mobile internet penetration rates now in the DRC is nearly to 26%. So only 26% of the DRC population is accessing the internet through their mobile phones. So this gives you, I hope, internet and connectivity in the country. And so now talking about some of the barriers, and I would say, as others pointed out, like that the first barrier in the DRC currently is the cost of accessing the internet, because people have to access the internet from their mobile phones, they have to access the internet from their computers, or they have to go into a cyber cafe in order to have access to the internet. And for all those devices or all those places where people connect, they need to pay money. And so when people don't have the money to either buy a phone or either buying a computer or being able to pay for internet cafe, and then they won't be able, to access the internet. So that's the case in most African countries, but now speaking specifically about the DRC. The second thing that I consider personally as a barrier, and you have seen this throughout the work that Root International has been doing in the country, is digital illiteracy. People not knowing how to use the internet, because for you to be able to connect to the internet, you need to know how to go for it. You might have a phone, but you don't know how to use your phone to connect to the internet. You might have a computer, but you probably don't know how to use your computer. And I loved what our colleague Norbert pointed out in terms of people with disability. The issues they are having. It's not only because they don't know how to use it, but also what are the tools available for them to be able to connect to the internet. That's why I think we need more trainings for people to be able to access the internet. The third one is these barriers, that are being created by the states itself. And in the DRC, we've had a lot of experiences of governments putting barriers, access barriers to people, in terms of internet shutdowns, in terms of blocking specific websites, in terms of putting in tax, some forms of tax, which are preventing people from accessing the internet. For the past few years, I think since 2011, we've had a number of times internet has been shut down in the DRC. And the last time internet was shut down in the DRC was in between December 2018 and January 2019, because we had elections at that specific time. And so from that time, as of now, we haven't seen any more internet shutdowns. And so talking about the COVID pandemic, you know, it's changed a lot, but not that much compared to those barriers people used to have in the past. Because in the DRC, during the COVID pandemic, this was around September 2020, the government has imposed a new tax on mobile phones in the country. And this has been widely spoken about in the country. You know, you have to pay, it's called RAM in RAM in French, which is a register for mobile services. So you have to pay between $2 and $7, depending on the type of phone you are using. Either it's a 2G or a 4G or 5G phone. And so you have to pay this money for you to be able to even communicate or even being able to buy data. At some point, the government, through the regulatory agency as well as the ICT minister, who are the ones who instigated this new tax in the country. So you had first to pay for this tax before you can even load data or load airtime in your phone, or even being able to access the internet. And so people have spoken about this question in the country, so many voices, including a statement that we were able to put together, but also even we went talking to different stakeholders, trying to explain to them why this is a barrier to connectivity in the country. Because imagine if your phone costs $50, like a 2G feature phone costs you $50. So after 1 year, if you add that $2 or $7 if you're using a smartphone, your phone is becoming more expensive. And so now asking people to be able to, to first pay that tax for them to be able to access the internet is also another barrier to connectivity in the country. So that's the situation in the country. So COVID came up with, people not being able to being affected economically. So they are no longer able to afford, paying for accessing the internet. But also the new tax making it difficult for people to, even before they can buy airtime to communicate or even to browse the internet, they have first to pay this registration fees. So I hope that is useful somehow, and I look forward to interacting on these issues that I just mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Asen, for your presentation. And right now, I'm not sure we'll have time to take questions. So because of that, maybe we'll just ask all our panelists to give maybe in 1 minute or thereabout on how we can minimize these barriers that have been identified by each of the panelists, and as a result, if possible, also create opportunities on how to surmount these barriers with respect to provisioning more internet access. Also, given the challenges, the peculiarity of the challenges we found ourselves during the pandemic. So I will start with Tapiwa. Just one parting, maybe 2 sentences or thereabout on how we can move forward from here. Thank you, Tapiwa.
Thanks so much. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Tomio, for that. So there are quite a couple of things going on here, and we can actually see, as Juliet rightly put across, that who is telling the African story and what do we need to do in terms of making use of the digital revolution, which is currently ongoing. So I think one of the most important things is to make sure that we have got a spectrum allocation. For instance, in South Africa, you can see that Telkom has wielded so much power on it, and once that comes out, I was checking yesterday that this issue is now coming again, that it needs to to be auctioned by April or March thereabouts next year. And so that's the first thing that we need in terms of data costs. So data must come down, and for data to come down, what we need to create an enabling environment which will enable inclusivity for all the people in the society. Then we've got another issue of financial inclusion. We need to foster issues like digital ID so that we can have more people being able to register for and access digital financial services without having to go into the banking world. So we have got these issues that have been brought into because of COVID, and we don't want to say now after COVID, then we can go back to the issue where we have to go and queue in the bank. So that's one of the other things that I think is also very important to consider. Then generally, we need more women, to take space in terms of digital literacy, as have been mentioned. Then we need more women to take more spaces in the STEM education to drive forward the internet use and the issues of cybercrime. We need an inclusive environment, which is taking care of actually almost everyone to participate. So just in a nutshell, I think that's what I would prove. Then the last thing would be in terms of cross-border flows, in terms of taxation and how African countries can import these. We need these devices that are internet enabled. We need to make sure that there is an regional integration, which makes it easier for countries to exchange devices without paying much of these taxes that have been mentioned earlier on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tapiwa. Juliet? Parting words.
Parting words. I'll keep it brief, but essentially everything that Tapiwa has said. I'll just add to that the need for more pressure by all the different actors in the spectrum, academics, ordinary users, civil society actors, people within government as well, the business sector. We need a more prolific voice to ensure that we use the internet as a platform to promote the access of information, but also to encourage the freedom of expression, as it were, as we need to have our narrative online. We need to write it because no one else will write it for us. So if it's done for us, it won't be the right one. And very passionate about that because we are having an entire new generation of youngsters coming online, and we need to be concerned about the information that they're going to find, the narratives that they're going to find about themselves, their people, their countries, their contexts. And right now there's a gap. And so that is something that we need to really push for, including through platforms like this, by a whole spectrum of actors and individuals, as has been pointed out by all speakers here. We are all cut of different cloths, but we need to run for the same goal. So yes, digital inclusion to the core, but ultimately for the realization of an African narrative. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliet. Over to you, Robert.
Yes, thank you very much. Taking it from Juliet, for me, I can say that we believe that's why we say nothing for us without us. Thank you, African Internet Governance Forum, for including the voice of people with disabilities. This is what we want everywhere. In different forums, the bodies of ICT must be inclusive of voices of people with disabilities. And that can help us, but also the issue of hardwares. Take an example in Uganda here. If a person is buying a car, a person with a physical disability is buying a car, there's some tax exemption for that. If that can be applied on these gadgets we use of the smartphones, the tabs and everything to be tax-free or tax-exempted for people with disabilities, that could help in improving our accessibility to internet, and also not forgetting the implementation of the laws that we have in the land and developing guidelines on digital inclusion. And this can be the way to go. Thank you so very much. Robert Nkwangu, thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. And Hassan.
Yeah, I think my colleagues have said it all, but I think I just want to add one or two things, because I'm glad Juliet mentioned that in Ethiopia, they now have a second telecom operator. I think this is something we need to encourage. If a country has so many telecom operators, this has an implication on the costs of accessing the internet, or even the telecommunication sector. So we need to, if we can, encourage more investors investing into this business, because this not only helps competitivity in the country in terms of pricing, but also this helps the most of the regions to be covered by the network. So I think we also need to keep on training people, conducting a lot of digital literacy trainings and capacity building programs, making sure people know how to use the internet. Because when there is will and when you have access to a training, then you make things happen. So I think we need to, if each one of those of us and other organizations can also be involved into training women and men, children, and all those people in need, train them on how to use the internet, those basics notions that they need. I think we can increase the level of digital literacy on the continent, and this will be have a positive result in terms of people being able to enjoy, their access to the internet. Lastly, I think on those barriers that are being put by the government, as civil society organizations, I think we need to research and dig more on how we can approach our legislators and push for change in terms of legislations in the country, so that those kind of barriers being brought together by the states can be diminished. I'm happy at least to say that for the last 3 years, since 2019, almost 3 years, we haven't had internet shutdowns nor those other kind of violations. So I think this also goes with political will. If those political authorities that we have wants to improve accessibility and helping people have access to technology, they can do it. Rather than limiting people's ability to connect, they should put together measures encouraging people to have more access to the internet. So thank you very much again for everyone and for inviting me on this panel. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Asen, for that. And thank you so much to all our speakers, Asen, Juliet, Robert, and Tapiwa, for taking time and also keeping faith with us despite the many postponements up until this moment. Thank you for finally making it to join us. And I hope everyone that has been able to join us, and also to our participants, thank you for joining. I hope we've been able to pick one or two useful points to take forward on issues with respect to internet access in the region. And I also wish the organizers all the best going forward with the remainder of the sessions. And that will be the end of this particular session, and see you at other sessions. Do have a nice day, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.